Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Adam with Retro Repairs, and this is part 2 of my Game Boy series. So this is the second Game Boy that I have where I was experiencing power issues. In part 1 I fixed this clear one. Part 2 I'm going to work on this atomic purple one. I've already gone ahead and taken the screws out, so it's a little bit easier to open up here. I've shown you in the first video how to do so. The first video I had 2 issues. The power switch was flaky and the battery contacts were corroded. Well, these battery contacts are pretty good. This particular one, I'm just experiencing power switch issues. So I was kind of playing with it a little bit, and it actually does turn on now, but it was still a little bit flaky. So I want to open up that power switch and really clean it up, make it look good so this works every single time. I'm also going to do this a little bit differently today. I'm going to try and do this in one shot, so I can see how quickly I can get this done. So first thing we do, open up the case, take out the little slider here, and this is the switch that we want to try and get at here. So in order to do so, what I have to do, grab my soldering iron, and I'm just going to get right at desoldering this. So I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see what's going on here. So first thing I want to do, heat up the solder blobs that are already there, and we want to be careful to not contact really anything else. So we don't want to bridge any gaps, any solder bridges, anything like that. So I've heated up the solder that's already there. I'm going to work on kind of popping this out. So this switch does kind of take a little bit of playing to get it up. And the first leg is really kind of the most challenging. Once you get the first one up, it's excuse me, pretty easy to get the rest up. We'll try using some desoldering braid just to remove any excess solder from there.
Okay, so I think I have that pad up just enough that I can get my tool under it and pry it off. Maybe not.
There we go. So now I can get my tool under this. Still not quite. There we go. So I was able to pry the first side of it off, and if the second side doesn't come, there we go. You just need to hit it with the desoldering iron a little bit, or soldering iron a little bit to loosen up that solder. So we take the slide off, and as you can see, compared to the first video, this isn't too bad. A little bit of tarnish up there, and I just want to scrape that down, sand it down with a little bit of sandpaper. So I take my 1500 grit sandpaper and just scrape the inside of this. We just want to restore the all metal contacts. So you can also just use tweezers as well, We want to just try and scrape up as much as we possibly can. And then use a little bit of alcohol on a Q-tip, wipe it down nicely, get up really all that you can. There we go. So, before we reassemble it, I want to do the same thing with the slide part. So, take the slide, wipe it down there. Also use the Q-tip just to kind of get whatever you can off it. And then last thing we want to do is, using my tweezers, just gently pry up these metal contacts a bit. We just want to make sure that there's a solid, reliable connection. There we go. So we're going to put that into place. Now, before I go ahead and solder that cover back on, what I want to do first is just put down a little bit of solder so that it will be easy to solder back. So 1 blob, 2 blobs. Perfect. You want it to be nice and shiny there, so right at those solder points it's nice and shiny. So that means it's fresh and it will be able to flow nicer. Then line everything up, put the cover in place. Oops. Making note, see how there's a couple notches on here? The notches should go on the inside. So then, applying pressure downwards, I'm just going to heat up that solder blob, and it will hold this slide into place. So same thing again right here, applying pressure with my thumb, heat up the solder, and it fits nicely into place. So make sure that this still slides, and it does. So we will give it a test. So I'm going to put that plastic bit here in. I want to make sure that it actually sits on that arm. There we go. And then I'll zoom us out. Put the back cover on. Grab a couple of batteries. And a game. And we're good. We have power. But I have no sound. So, sound is an issue that I'm going to have to tackle on take 2. So, we fixed that power switch issue, but the sound issue, it could be a bad speaker, it could be a couple of things. We want to see if these contacts have let go at all. No, they have not. So, unfortunately, this will be a multi-take video, but that first issue with the power, we were able to resolve that right away. Alright, so we're going to try take 2 now, and we're going to replace that speaker that's blown. So I've ordered a speaker replacement off eBay. Cost, I think, about $2 or $3, shipped from Canada, delivered to Canada, so works out great for me. A couple of things we need to do before we solder that on is take apart the rest of the board here. So there's a couple things that we need to do. Firstly, just get rid of all the parts. We've already opened up the shell. Take the slider off here. That's for the power switch. And then you might notice there's a few screws. 1, 2, 3. I think there's just the 3 screws that hold the board on. We are going to remove those, but first we need to get rid of this ribbon connector up here. So I think these 2 black sliders will just pop up. Yeah, so they just, at the very top here, there's 2 little black tabs. You just grab it with your fingernail and pop it up like that. And then your ribbon cable should lift straight out. So you want to be careful that you're not going to break this. If it doesn't go quite nicely, there we go. So just like that. So pulling it out, if it doesn't go quite nicely, you could probably also unscrew the board and then lift the board back. But if you can get rid of the ribbon connector first, that helps to avoid putting undue stress on that. Next we're going to do is undo those screws. So 3 small Phillips head screws are all we need. So 1. And again, keep these separate from your case screws because the case screws, they were tri-wing and these are Phillips. So they are different. You can't, well, you probably could mix them up, but you don't want to. All right, so 3 screws removed. This should just lift right off, just like that. There we go. And we're gonna put the case aside. What you could do is take a look at your case, and if necessary, you can clean out any dust or stuff in there. This one's actually pretty good, so I'm not really gonna do anything with that. I'm just gonna put it aside, and we're gonna focus on this board. So let's zoom in a little bit. On the board here, you might notice the orange wires, and they're soldered directly onto the speaker. So what you're gonna do is grab your soldering iron and simply desolder those wires. That noise you hear is my dog playing with its ball of some type, so she might poke her nose in here, but we'll see. Anyways, heat up your soldering iron, and you can use tweezers for this, which could be helpful as well. What you want to do is, all you need to do, grab the wire, heat up the solder, and lift the wire out, just like that. Same thing over here, grab the wire. You might need to rotate it a bit to get your soldering iron in there, but grab the wire, heat up the solder, lift the wire out. And there we have, the speaker is detached. So now it's time to install the new one. The new one I got is a little bit different, but still pretty similar. First thing I want to do is just kind of dry fit it into here to make sure that it looks like it fits okay. So it's in there. It does move around a bit, which I'm not sure it's supposed to or not. Let's see how this one fits. That wiggles a bit too, so I don't feel too badly about that. So I'm just going to line this up. You see that there's 4 metal contacts here, and there's some blue epoxy or something covering up the 2 middle ones. I'm going to assume we just need to hook into the 2 on the outside, but I'm not positive. So might be some trial and error here. I'm going to keep the polarity the same, so it'll hook up just like that. So to start, we're going to get that one out of the way. I'm going to lay this flat, and using my tweezers, all that we should need to do is just heat up the blobs of solder. So do that first, just to make sure that the solder moves. There, should make them nice and shiny. There. If the solder doesn't flow very well that's already on there, you could also add some more solder. So now, using my tweezers, all we're going to do is apply pressure down, heat up the solder, and stick that wire into place. And there we go, that's the first wire. Second wire is the exact same thing. Using my tweezers, we're going to apply some pressure directly onto that pad. Heat the solder up. And let it cool, and there we go. So that new speaker is installed. It was actually very simple. Do a quick little inspection to make sure that it's in place, and also you want to make sure that you're not bridging the gap between any of these contacts. So this one I want to double check just with my tweezers that, pull that wire out a little bit, that it's not connecting onto this inside one, and it is not. It looks good. So next step, we reconnect this ribbon connector. Just all you need to do for that, line it up and push it straight in, and then pinch these little black locks shut. line up the speaker into the hole that it's supposed to go into. And there we go, just like that. So now that's in the way it's supposed to be. We're just gonna tack this together very gently because I want to test it before I put this all back together. So we're gonna put the switch in here and we're gonna put the back cover on. So now this will be the moment of truth. Before we had no sound. Let's throw a game in here. Power is off. Oops. Still no sound. So that is unfortunate. I was hoping that simply putting in a new speaker would fix that. So unfortunately, was not able to fix that in one take. So I'm gonna look up the specs on this speaker just to make sure that there's no special considerations when installing it, and if I find anything else, I will come back. If not, I'll try and see if there's something else that might be causing this. Maybe one of these capacitors needs to be replaced. I'm not too sure, but in case I don't return, thanks a lot for watching the video. I hope that this at least was helpful in teaching you how to open up that switch and clean it out. And unfortunately, you weren't able to solve the sound issue, but I'm going to keep looking that up, and hopefully there's something else that can be fixed. Thanks a lot. Subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time. All right, so I have officially ruled out the speaker as being the issue here. I've tried a new speaker. Doesn't make a difference. I've also tried plugging headphones into the jack, which I didn't do before, and it still doesn't work. So there are two kind of last-ditch effort things I'm going to try out. First of all is I'm going to try and bypass the headphone jack and tap it right into the output for the speaker. So these two pins right here are going to be what connects the headphone jack to the speaker. And how it works, it's going to be difficult to see, but if you look in this corner of the headphone jack, as soon as I unplug or plug speakers or headphones in, you see this little arm that moves at the bottom. When you unplug, it completes the circuit and sends signal to the speaker. When you plug it in, it opens that circuit so that it only uses the headphones and cuts out signal to the speaker. I'm going to try and bypass this altogether, and hopefully we will be able to just tap the speakers into these pins. So it's relatively easy to do. All I'm going to do is just desolder the speaker wire and solder it on to the next spot here. So to do so, what I need is my tweezers. And of course my soldering iron. So it should be easy to get these out. All you do is heat up the solder and pull. Heat up the solder, pull. So by doing this, I'm essentially ruling out that little switch as being a problem with sending a signal to the speaker. If it doesn't work, we're going to move further up the circuit and try a couple other things. So with these speakers, it shouldn't really matter which order the polarity of these, just as long as it goes into the proper one, or into the proper connection. Going to put a little more solder on that connection. There's just not much holding that in place. All right, so fingers crossed, we're going to put this back into its shell, just the back half, so that I can hook in batteries. And a game. And let's see. Nope, still nothing. So, next thing I'm going to do is try and replace the capacitors along the circuit here. I'm going to put this speaker back where it belongs, and then I will be back and show you how I'm going to do the capacitors. Okay, so I'm about to start working on these capacitors here. So a couple of things that I need to tell you about caps before we go about and replacing them. These capacitors are polarized, meaning you can only set them in one way. There's a positive side and a negative side right there. On this type, this is a through-hole style capacitor. The gray stripe is negative and the black side is positive, and they have two different size legs. It's very important that you match up the negative and the positive to the proper side. If you don't, it's not going to work and the capacitor actually could blow up. So, I guess I'll just kind of jump right into it. Removing surface mount capacitors isn't overly hard. You simply touch the solder blob on the side, and then you want to try and lightly pull the capacitor up. Same thing on the other side. Touch the solder blob. You just got to be careful not to lift up any pads. If you find that it's not coming up easily, like this one isn't, you can always apply a little bit of solder just so that it will flow better. Now we'll try reflow it and lift it up. There we go. That's one side, and then we'll do the same thing to the other side. There we go. So capacitor is off. This is what the bottom of it kind of looks like. There's two little pins that connect to these pads, and then you have the pads themselves here. So what I like to do before reconnecting any new capacitor is kind of clean these a bit and add a bit of solder to them. So you want a nice shiny solder blob. Lots of solder for the new cap to grab into. Now, since I'm using a different style, I'm not replacing with a surface mount capacitor, we have to cut these legs and bend them a bit. So we do have a bit of room in the case so that I can actually fit this, but not a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these legs with, let's say, maybe 1/2 centimeter of space. So this is what I've got here. And then I want to bend these legs, kind of curl them outward so that I have a flat bit to grab onto. So if I kind of use my finger to show you, I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but you can see there's little hooks on them, and that's what I'm looking to get here. So once again, making sure that the negative side is being soldered to the negative and the positive to the positive. I get my spacing right, line it up to make sure visually I can see that it's going to fit. I turn it so that negative is facing negative, and then I simply solder it into place. So grab my tweezers, adding a little bit of pressure down. All you do to put this into place is heat up the solder blob and let it cool with the leg in place, and it will stay. So we heat up the solder again on the other leg. So it takes only a couple of seconds to cool, and that's going to be our final product with that. So we have a new through-hole style capacitor, which is in place of the old one, sitting in place. And I should have mentioned, the rating on these is printed on the side. So this is 100 microfarads, 16 volts. The old capacitor has the ratings printed on the top, so 100 microfarads, 4 volts. Voltage can be changed a little bit. You can go above the voltage, just not below it. However, the capacitance rating, which is the 100 microfarads, has to remain the same. So that's what's important that I replace is with another 100 microfarad one. So I'm going to do these other two capacitors, one there and one here, and I'll be back once that's complete. Okay, so I've removed the other capacitors. I figured I'd show you once again kind of how I install the new ones. So again, I've curled these legs on this new capacitor. I've actually done it outwards this time, as it's a little bit of a larger capacitor. And again, lining up the negative stripe on the new one with the negative terminal on the old spot. And again, all I do is I hold it in place, heat up the solder, embed the leg, let the solder cool for a moment. Do the same thing with the other side. So heat up the solder, embed the leg, and let the solder cool. We're going to straighten it upwards and do the same thing for this last one here. So the final and third and final one is right there. Again, negative terminal on this one is on this side. So using my tweezers, hold the capacitor and just heat up the solder. You want to make sure that when you're doing this, that you're not touching the capacitor legs together. So you want the legs to be short enough that once they're installed, let's try and focus this a bit better. Once they're installed, so one leg right here and one there, they're not going to be bent and touching each other together. Okay, so we've got those in. This will be kind of a moment of truth. If this doesn't work, I'm not really too sure what other course of action I have. So one thing to definitely be aware of is when reassembling this shell, you have to line the capacitor up in order so that it will fit, because these are taller. There is some space in this shell, however, I think I've used up nearly all of it. So I may have to actually bend this capacitor. I do. You can kind of see right here, the capacitor is touching. So what I'm going to do is, what I could have done is made these legs a little bit shorter, but all we're going to do is kink one of these capacitor legs inwards, and then we're going to bend this. So again, we need to be very careful that the legs don't short each other out. So I don't know if we can quite see. Yeah. So the legs are bent, but they're not touching, which is what we need. And you have to do the same thing with this one. So this one we have actually a bit of space, quite a bit more space, so I'm just going to bend it flat down. I don't have enough space, so it also has to come this way a bit. So the trick is going to be kind of just bending them just right so that we get everything in that we need. This one, I actually have to bend the other way. So we do want to be careful if, crap, I just felt something kind of break. So I think I may have lifted up a pad a little bit here. So I'm going to take this off entirely, reflow this, hopefully we keep a good connection to the board, and I'm just going to bend these legs manually by hand. So all that involves grabbing it with your tweezers, bending them, and then we will put it back into place. Now hopefully that fits a little bit nicer. And it does. Okay, so I'm going to inspect those just visually, make sure that I didn't break any type of contact with this capacitor, so I want to see what it's supposed to connect to, which is somewhat difficult on this board to read. But it seems connected there. Oh. And good thing I did, because this leg here actually was not even connected. I have to go back and make sure that that's properly soldered in. So always a good idea to just give your work a kind of once over before you start reassembling everything. Otherwise, this just wouldn't have worked. Okay, so hopefully that keeps it. I'm just going to check everything else and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I check to make sure that this capacitor is still connected properly. As like I said, I had thought I lightly lifted a bit of a pad, but it's still good. So you take your multimeter, touch one leg, and then you find where the trace runs to. So in this case, it runs over here. And I just want to complete the circuit, and I hear a beep. If I move to the other leg, we're good. So that means that we have full continuity and that capacitor is installed and it should work properly. Oh. However, in the process, this this wire to the speaker broke off, so I need to add some more solder and get this reconnected. So what I like to do, basically just add a little solder to the pad, add a little bit of solder to the wire, and then heat up both solder blobs together and it will create a bond. There we go. So now, hopefully we will have sound again. This is kind of the moment of truth for this. So I'll put the game in, zoom you out a bit. I'm even going to put the front part back on just to kind of make sure that the fact that the ribbon not being connected doesn't make a difference. So we actually have to start with that. So we put the speaker back in its hole where it goes, just like so. Hook all this in, ribbon connector into the top, put the power slide back on, back cover on, game and batteries. So, moment of truth. No sound. Game load's fine. I'm just going to test my headphones again. No, still definitely no sound coming out of the headphones either. So I'm I'm kind of at a loss as to where to go from here. We've tried quite a number of things. We've tried a new speaker. We've tried replacing the capacitors. I've tried giving the headphone jack a clean. I've tried bypassing the headphone jack entirely. Something else is at fault here. So I don't know if it's one of the main chips up at the top. I've tried, actually, I didn't do this on camera, but I tried just reflowing these contacts on this volume switch. Didn't seem to make any difference. So, yeah, I'm not really sure where else to go from this. So, I'm going to leave the video at this, I think. So, if I invite any of you, if you have any ideas or you've seen this before, definitely, by all means, leave a comment. Let me know what you think, what I can try on my next video. I'm open to suggestions. I've kind of exhausted all the basic ones here, I think, but there may be something else I didn't think of that we could try do. Unfortunately, I'm not really in a position to be trying to replace any of these chips. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not really too familiar with the circuitry of the Game Boy, so any ideas that you might have, by all means, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, thanks for watching. It's too bad that I wasn't able to successfully fix this, but at least hopefully some people might find it useful of things that you can try to look forward to resolve the issue on your own Game Boy. So thanks again. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you like what you see, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks.